Okay, welcome back. This is Genes, Development, and Behavior, Part 3. We're going to finish this lecture with the last few slides. And we're talking about the context in which genes are expressed and how the context, the environment, can have a big influence on development, on behavior. And we had already talked about some different phenotypes that can occur. We talked about polyphenism. I want to talk about now maternal effects, how mom's behavior can have a significant impact on the behavior of her young. And we can look at humans, we can look at other animals as well. One of the things that we find that's really important are prenatal influences. Prenatal influences like one's diet, the drugs or the medicines one uses, the viruses one's exposed to can have a huge impact on the behavior of the young years after birth. So there's an interesting story that has to do with the starvation winter of 1944-1945 in the Netherlands. So the Netherlands was under German occupation at the end of World War II and had been so for years and years. And 1944, 1945, right before liberation, was the worst winter ever. People in cities especially starved. My mom grew up in Rotterdam and was living in Rotterdam at this time. And it was a big city, and my grandpa had to feed 7 kids. She was 3 at the time, and she still remembers when the Canadians dropped food by airplane into their fields near their home. They were so excited to have food coming from the sky from the Canadians. This was a terrible winter. And it turns out that for babies that were born during this winter, babies that were conceived during the winter and then born just after it, have a 2-fold increased risk of later developing schizophrenia and neural defects on top of it. So what happens in utero has an impact on behavior later, okay? Diet's really important. Other things like drugs, alcohol exposure in utero have a huge impact on behavior. We know that. We've looked at, you probably understand fetal alcohol syndrome. Babies born with fetal alcohol syndrome have poor growth. They have decreased muscle tone. They have delayed development of thinking, social skills, speech, movement. Why? What's the cause? Mom using alcohol during a pregnancy. Viruses can also have huge impacts on one's phenotype as an older person or as an adult. And I've got all sorts of examples. I gave you an example that was wrong in video 1, and I want to replay that. The influenza pandemic of 1918 did have an impact on babies who were born just after that. Babies exposed to influenza in utero have had earlier mortality as adults, more diabetes, more heart disease, and more depression after age 50 than babies who are not exposed in utero to such things, than people who are not exposed in utero to influenza. I mistakenly said that people exposed to influenza in utero have a higher rate of schizophrenia, and that's not true. I said that wrong in video 1. But we wonder, at this point, what does being exposed to COVID-19 in utero, what kind of effects is that going to have? We may not know for 30, 40, 50 years. We really won't know. There are other viruses that can have huge impacts if a person is exposed in utero to things like rubella. Individuals have a higher chance of having schizophrenia. So there are a lot of effects prenatally even. It's crazy. Okay, and then there are other things like memes. Memes are essentially culturally transmitted information, right? We use memes now in a little bit different way when we think about, funny videos or pictures that are rapidly spread through the internet. But memes, by definition, are elements of culture or systems of behavior that are passed from one individual to another in a non-genetic way. Okay? Especially passed through by imitation. Well, guess what? Mom is a perfect way to get information, right? Moms provide a lot of early experiences and early learning done by the young. I saw a couple of examples in our textbook that I thought were pretty interesting, our Mother Nature textbook, that show us some memes. The examples she gave had to do with the number of children you plan to have or you would have. And she said that the Hutterites, a group of Anabaptist pacifists who lived in big communities, have an incredibly high birth rate. You're the most likely to have lots of children if you grew up as a Hutterite, especially compared to another group of kind of religious peoples called the Shaking Quakers, who are celibate. So you're much less likely to have offspring if you were raised in this group. But these kinds of memes are things that you hear and see all the time. So I was walking my dog, who at the time, I have new dogs now because my dog Heather died a number of years ago, but she was the most docile, sweet dog ever. And I remember my neighbor walking by with her daughter, who was maybe 5 or 6, and she said, "Oh, don't get too close to that dog, it might bite." There was no evidence that my dog was even remotely thinking about biting. Her tail was up, her ears were relaxed, her face was happy, she didn't have any fur raised, she was just happily going about her way. She was probably excited to see a 5-year-old. And we had 5 kids. She's used to 5-year-olds, she knows what they do. It was a meme. That mother was telling her daughter, hey, dogs bite. And that's powerful, how moms transmit information to their kids. That happens, this kind of culturally transmitted information happens in animals as well. And I have a picture there of a Japanese macaque. These guys there are some funny stories about them, but there's a group of them that live on an island, and they're actually fed supplemental foods by people. And one of the macaques learned to wash its sweet potatoes in water. So they were given a bunch of sweet potatoes in the sand on the beach, and then it would be all sandy. So it would wash its sweet potatoes in water and then eat it. Well, that behavior of washing the sweet potatoes spread wildly through the whole group of monkeys by observation and repetition, by imitation. Memes can have an impact on our behavior, especially when we're thinking about our early behavior and what we learn. And really, I think about this girl who was scared of my really docile, sweet dog, and I kind of feel sorry for her. She developed a kind of anxiety about dogs. She would walk by my fence as an older girl, and my dog would just be sitting there smiling away, and she would just be terrified. She'd jump away from the fence almost into the street because she was worried that the dog was going to somehow do something. Memes are powerful. Maternal effects. Here's another example of maternal effects having a huge impact on development and behavior. Mom's investment strategy or her investment decisions can affect us. And that's covered in chapter 13 of Mother Nature. It's a really interesting chapter. But culturally, moms in a lot of different cultures have a preference for one gender over the other. And that can influence how much time and energy mom gives to each child. It can influence parental commitment. And when you've got that kind of differences, it can have big effects, right? So here are just some examples of some of the things I found in our Mother Nature book to help us kind of get a feeling for how an investment strategy can have a cultural effect. It can be so ingrained in us, if you will. So in Tibet, for example, this proverb kind of says it all. There is a proverb that says, daughters are no better than crows. If you grow up in a culture like this, it has an effect on who you are and how you develop and what you think about women in that society, right? Now, here's an interesting thing. In Kenya, there are different groups of people who, the pastoralists, these are the people who raise sheep and cattle, the Maasai, prefer sons. But the Moku Godo, I don't know how to say that, whose daughters often marry the Maasai men, prefer daughters. And they actually breastfeed their daughters longer than their sons, and they will take them to clinics faster than they'll take a sick son, because they have a reason to keep their daughters healthy. Their daughters can marry off into the Maasai, and that gives them additional wealth, etc. They can move up the caste system, if you will. Here's another interesting one. In a village in Bangladesh, daughters with one or more sisters have a 90% higher chance of dying before the end of childhood than do girls without an older sister. What does that all mean? It means having one daughter is okay in Bangladesh, but the second daughter families are tend to put less time and energy and care into that second daughter, right? That's what it seems to say. And of course, a lot of cultures have what's called sex-biased infanticide, and that is continuing today. What decisions that mom makes, her investment strategies, do have a big impact on who we become. And that's true of all cultures, not faraway cultures that seem foreign to us, but here, our culture too. And so genes can't be separated from the context in which they're expressed. Okay? I do like one comment. I have an adopted daughter, Faith. I do like one comment that Sarah Hardy made. And she said, the biological mother, she was comparing biological to genetic to adoptive, and she said, really, a biological mother nourishes, nurtures, and provides the environment in which the infant develops, both physically and psychologically. And so she was kind of against the use of the term biological mother to describe someone who had given birth. So like, I'm an adopted mother of Faith, and the biological mother lives in Ethiopia. She would say, no, you're the biological mom, because you nourished and nurtured and provided this environment in which Faith grows up. That's important. Okay. The mom who gave birth to Faith clearly was important to, Sarah Hardy calls her the genetic mom. It makes sense. It makes sense. Our biology is more than just our genetics. It's the development that happens, the environment and the developmental into the developmental context in which those genes are expressed. And that's it. So that's the end of lecture 7. I just got to get out of here, right?